Discovery class, thanks for dropping by today. My topic for today is called the glint in your eye. Our eyes can tell us a lot about who we are, doesn't it? I find myself studying someone's eyes more now than ever before. And the reason, I think, is because we're all wearing masks. I brought one, and when you put a mask on, it covers everything in your face except your eyes. So when you're wearing it, all you're seeing is above here. And when someone has their mask on and you see their eyes, if you look carefully and they give you eye contact, you can tell a great deal about their personality. At least I can. You can say, are they smiling behind that mask? Are they shy? Are they caring? Are they embarrassed? Is their personality bland? Are they full of mischief? Are they accepting? Are they begging for a conversation? Maybe they're mad. They're saying, just get out of my way. During his days as President of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, he was the third president. His dates were 1801 to 1809. He was a lawyer, an attorney, and he was one of the founding fathers of the Declaration of Independence. He was actually their prime author. He and a group of companions were traveling across the country on horseback, and they came to a river that had left its banks because of its recent downpour. And the swollen river had washed the bridge away. And each rider was forced to ford the river on horseback, fighting for his life against the rapid current. And the riders were frightened. What would their horse do in the current? Standing on the bank was a stranger, and he stepped aside to let each of the riders through to the water's edge for them to go across. After several had plunged in and made it to the other side, the stranger asked President Jefferson if he would carry him across the river. The president agreed without hesitation, and the man climbed on, and shortly thereafter the two of them made it safely to the other side. As the stranger slid off the back of the horse on dry ground, one of the group asked him, "Tell me, why did you select the president to ask for this favor?" In shock, the man admitted that he had no idea that it was the president who had helped him across. "All I know," he said, "is that in your eyes was written the answer no. When the man who took me rode by, I could see in his eyes the answer was yes. And he extended his arm and he drew me back onto his horse, and the glint in his eye said, 'I'll be happy to serve you. Hop on.'" In our Bible, there's a wonderful story about a man whose character is marked by the glint in his eye. It's a story that only appears once in the whole Bible. And you know, God does some strange things when he writes the scripture. In his writing, he will often put a single individual in a single chapter, in a single book, and he makes his appearance. We study a life from him, and then he disappears. Well, that's true in the Old Testament book, in the second last chapter, the book of 1 Kings. There's a name there of a man who I say has a glint in his eye. He's never mentioned again in the whole Bible. The prophets don't mention his name. Jesus doesn't mention his name. The gospel writers don't mention his name. Luke, the author of the book of Acts, he doesn't mention the name. Paul doesn't mention him, nor does John in his Revelation say anything about him. You're probably saying, well, why are you mentioning him if he seems to have so little importance? Now keep in mind, we're going to study someone who has a glint in his eye. How did he get it? What's he going to do with it? Is there a price to pay for having a glint in your eye? The story is found, as I said, in the second last chapter of the book of 1 Kings. It takes the entire chapter in the Bible to tell the story. And there are three main characters that I'm going to mention to you. There's the king of Israel, that's the nation to the north. His name is Ahab. There's the king of Judah, those two tribes to the south. His name is Jehoshaphat. Thirdly, there's a singular prophet of the Lord whose name is Micaiah, M-I-C-A-I-A-H. I didn't say Micah. Micah comes a lot later. This is Micaiah. You're only going to see his name in this one chapter, and this is who I'm going to talk about. He's the fellow that has the glint in his eye. Now, the whole story centers around a piece of land that belonged to the people of Israel. Just a little strip of real estate that bordered the king of Israel, the northern kingdom, on the eastern border, over beyond the Jordan River. And the people that are occupying it are a nation called the Amorites. Now, in our story, that strip of land in question is called Ramoth Gilead. Remember that one, Ramoth Gilead. In the Israelite battles with their neighboring nations to the east, the Amorites had lopped off this small portion of Jewish land and they settled it. And now Israel, after many years, has decided we want to have it back. It's going to be a present to the rest of our people that we can have the whole nation back together again. Now, I'm going to tell you the story as it unfolds in the chapter of 22 of 1 Kings. And then at the tail end, I'm going to give you an application. Chapter 22 begins with Israel enjoying 3 years of peace. There's been no fighting between the Amorites and the Israelites. And then Ahab, king of Israel, he says to his army generals, I think it's time. Yeah, I think it's time. Ramoth Gilead belongs to us. We're going to take it back. The generals, they counsel King Ahab and they say, well, we don't have to do this alone. We do have some cousins down there in the land of Judah. And those two tribes, that they take their armies and their chariots and their horses and they come up with us, we've got a formidable foe. And I think we can win. So that's what they did. Let's inquire and see if their army will come up and join us with our battle against these Amorites. In verse 5, it says, Ahab turned to Jehoshaphat and he said, will you join me in fighting for Ramoth Gilead? Jehoshaphat said, you bet. Absolutely. You asked me to do it? You're our cousins? Let's do it together. I'm all in. My troops are your troops. My horses are your horses. My chariots, they're your chariots. My archers, they're your archers. And then he continued, before we do anything, though, could we ask God for his guidance to see if he's on our side and what we should be doing? Maybe we should inquire of him. Remember, both the south and the north nations in Israel, they worship the same God, Yahweh. And Yahweh was always consulted before they ever went into war. David did it. Saul did it. All the other kings did it. And now they're asking to do the same. Verse 6, Ahab, king of Israel, got the prophets together, all 400 of them, and then put the question to them, should I attack Ramoth Gilead or should I hold back? Now there was a prophet guild in the nation of Israel that came down from the Levites. And these prophets, they were like seminary professors. And what they would do is be consulted in any matter of spiritual content and maybe history or moving forward as a nation as to what God would want them to do. Well, they asked these 400 prophets, should we go or should we hold back? Go for it. All 400 of them yelled in unison. God will hand it over to the king, and Ramoth Gilead will be given back to us. Verse 7. King Jehoshaphat said, now just hold on. You have these 400 that are all in unison saying, go ahead and do it. Is there still another prophet of God around here that maybe we could consult again? Maybe he would do that for us, and we could maybe get a balance in decision making? We've got 400 yes men, but is there one nonconformist? I think really is what Jehoshaphat is saying. You know, Brentview Baptist Church was founded years ago. It's a wonderful history story. They began in a little church over there in the center of town, just down below the old General Hospital. They were called Bridgeland Baptist. They got together in a basement of one of their members and they said, you know what's happening up to the northwest in Calgary? The city is growing. There are 3 brand new subdivisions. There's Collingwood, there's Brentwood, and there's Charleswood. And you know, those families that are out there are all young families with young children. Do you think the Lord would give us a lot somewhere in the midst of those 3 subdivisions where we could build our church? Well, they did. And where I'm sitting on this lot is where this church has sat for almost 60 years. And you know, when they came up, they had nothing to work with. They started in a little school like we did here in our church when we did our renovations. And you know, that first year, when they went and knocked on doors, they had over 300 children come to their DVBS. And from that, they built a Sunday school. And from the Sunday school, they built a church. And from the church, here we sit, Brentview Baptist Church. Do you know some of those people are still here in the congregation? I've had their funeral for 3 or 4 of them in the last year, but their spouses are still living. And you ought to hear their story. They're the most wonderful tonic you could ever take. You should meet them. One day I'm going to have them in class, and I may just have them as an interview. We'll sit around the table, and I'm going to ask the question, and they're going to tell their story. And you know, when they tell the story, you're going to be fascinated, and you're going to say, wow, is that how my church started? That's wonderful. They came from German roots. And from those German roots, they came into the Brentview Church as we see it with our name out front on the door, Brentview Baptist Church. Well, you would think that the voice of 400 yes men, prophets of Ahab, would be the answer, wouldn't it? Would you need any more advice? I mean, if you get the answer from all these people, and they're saying yes, why not go ahead and take Ramoth Gilead? Listen to Ahab's answer to Jehoshaphat's question, is there another prophet whom we could consult? Yep. Verse 8, King Ahab of Israel told Jehoshaphat, well, as a matter of fact, there is. But I hate him. I really can't stand him. He's never said anything good to me all the time I have known him as a prophet. Everything he says is doom, doom, and more doom. He's never said anything good to me yet, and that's why I never consult him. Verse 9. King Jehoshaphat, he listened, and then he said, I want to hear what this prophet has to say anyway. Can you bring him in? Is there any chance that maybe the one that you despise might have something to say to me that maybe would help this decision making? So King Ahab, he ordered one of his men to go and fetch the prophet Micaiah. His name was Micaiah, son of Imlah. Don't forget his name, M-I-C-A-I-A-H, Micaiah. Let me pause for a minute. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think Micaiah is going to agree with these 400 men? Surely he wouldn't be a nonconformist, would he? and oppose what the king wants to hear? He wouldn't do that, would he? One of my favorite journalists is Rex Murphy. Rex Murphy, he's a journalist with the National Post. And the reason I like him, when you hear him write his article, he's always telling the truth. And it doesn't matter who it is he's talking about. It could be the prime minister, it could be the governor, it could be whoever. He always tells the truth. And the reason I like the man, well, first of all, he comes from Newfoundland. I like that little island. I worked on that island one summer with a shantyman in the bush camp. But Rex Murphy, he was a wonderful student. Did you know that he was a Rhodes Scholar and he went to Oxford and he has his PhD? I have a lot of friends because I was in Newfoundland. And they love to laugh and tease. And they laugh at themselves. I have a friend that said to me once, he said, "Ron, do you know how the first Newfie got to Ontario?" I said, "No, how'd he get there?" He said they were playing hockey on the St. Lawrence and he got a breakaway. Isn't that cute? Well, anyway, Rex Murphy, if you read this week's editorial in the National Post, he's praising the policemen. And police have taken a big rap. You've seen what's happened to our neighbors down south. People are throwing bricks, they're throwing rocks. They're teasing and chastising the police. It's their fault. Well, there have been some wrongs. But they want the police now to all be fired. And they want to cut them back with their salaries, and on it goes. And what this article is that Rex Murphy wrote is, police are wonderful. They deserve our respect. You should, if you have a chance, to thank them. And they are the ones that are going to be the keepers of the springs. Let them do their job, and you enjoy their keeping. I had a strange thing happen some time ago. I was at McDonald's, and there was no one in there. They just opened the store. Everything else had been in the drive-thru. But they finally opened the store, and you could go, and there was a teller, and you could make your order. Well, I went into the store, and there was no one there, just me. And as I was about to go in and go up to the teller and make my order, in came, count them, 8 policemen. They parked their cars and their trucks out in the parking lot, and in they came together, all 8. And I said to the teller, I said, "Listen, do you see these policemen? I'm going to go to the back of the line, and whatever they order, I'm going to pay for it. And then you can take them one by one, and then they'll be out." Well, I told these policemen, I said, "I have a gift for you. You people are doing the most amazing job. And often you don't get thanks for it, but I'm going to say thanks." I said, "You know, in the Bible, there's a story about 10 lepers that were healed, and only one came back to say thanks. Well, I'm going to pretend that I'm one of the ones coming back to say thanks." And you know, one by one, they got in line, and they went up to the till, and they got their lattes or coffees, whatever they got. And as they came by, and they went out, they said thanks, not by their voice, but they said thanks by the glint in their eye. And I was so impressed. And when I was done, I was glad to do my job because I felt it was a small role. And as they were waiting, I was talking with them, and they came from all parts of life. There were guys, there were girls. They had their guns on their side. I couldn't have been in safer. I was probably in the safest place on earth with those 8. But you know, as they went by, that's what Rex Murphy said. Do you ever say thanks for the ones that really help? The ones that are kind of the no-names that are off to the side, and they're just those little ships that pass in the dark. Anyway, back to our story. Verse 10. The scripture says that while Ahab, king of Israel, and Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, were seated on their thrones dressed in royal robes, the prophets staged what I'm calling a prophecy performance for their benefit. One of the prophets, they made a set of horns, and they brandished them upon his head, just like this, and they called out with a loud voice, God's word, with these horns, we're going to gore the Amorites at Ramoth Gilead until there's nothing left of them. And then all 400 of the prophets began to yell and hoot and holler, "Go for it. Ramoth Gilead is ours. It's an easy victory. God is going to give it to the people of Israel." Verse 13. The messenger who went to get Micaiah said to Micaiah, The prophets have said yes to the question you're going to be asked. Should we go and take back Ramoth Gilead? I want you to agree with them. Don't come up with some silly answer that's yours. Just go in, and we've heard what they're saying. You agree with it. Go and fight the Amorites. Recover the land. Ramoth Gilead is ours. Micaiah looked at this one that had come to get him, and here's what he said, verse 14. And I think he had a glint in his eye when he said it. As surely as God lives, what God says, I'll say. Discovery class, I'm going to pause here. What do you think is going to happen? It doesn't sound like he's one of the 400 prophets. As God lives, what God says, I'll say. If you were Micaiah today, would you say that? As God lives, what God says, I'll say. If you're the only one, you're the nonconformist, would you say yes? Would you, like old Daniel of old, remember in our song, dare to be a Daniel, dare to stand alone, dare to have a purpose firm, and dare to make it known? Would you be Daniel? Is this fella Micaiah, another Daniel? The two kings, with their two armies, all set to battle Ramoth Gilead. You've already won. You'd almost think it was a slam dunk. It's ours, go ahead. What do you think Micaiah is going to say to these two kings? Well, let's find out. Verse 15. With Micaiah, before King Ahab, the king asked him, so, Micaiah, do we attack Ramoth Gilead, or do we hold back? What's your answer? Micaiah stood silent. And then he said, and this is where he comes with a glint in his eye, there is nothing in Scripture more sarcastic than what you're going to hear just now. Listen to his sarcastic reply. Go ahead. Go ahead. Easy victory. God's gift to the king. Can't lose. Verse 16. Ahab, the king, says, see what I mean? He's never agreed with me yet. How many times have I made your promise under oath? Tell me the truth, Micaiah, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, and you've never once told me the truth, and you're not doing it now. You sarcastically throw it back in my face, and you make fun of me right here in front of the king's court. Verse 23. You want the truth, your majesty? Says Micaiah. I'll tell you the truth. God filled the mouths of these 400 men of yours with lies. They're not telling the truth. If you go to battle with both your armies, both you and Jehoshaphat's, you're doomed. You're going to lose. And I'm telling you this up front before it happens. You can change your mind. Verse 24. One of the 400 prophets, hearing this, he went up to Micaiah and he punched him in the nose. And then he said, since when did the Spirit of God leave me and take it up with you? And probably with blood running down his face, Micaiah replied, I saw all of Israel scattered over the hills, sheep with no shepherd. Verse 27. Ahab had heard enough. he said, "Get Micaiah out of here. Lock him up. Put him in prison. And feed him bread and water until I get back." Now, in all my history studies of ancient times, this is the first time I have ever read or heard the term bread and water being fed to a prisoner. You've often heard it. Well, we'll feed him bread and water. Do you know where it came from? Right here. Chapter 22, 1 Kings. Micaiah said, "If you ever get back in one piece, I'm not a prophet of God." Isn't that beautiful? I'll say it again. Micaiah said, "If you ever get back in one piece, I'm no prophet of God." Okay, having told you the details of this saga between Ahab and Jehoshaphat, the 400 yes men, and finally Micaiah, how do you think the story is going to end? Do you think the battle is going to be won and they're going to reclaim Ramoth Gilead? Is it going to be successful, do you think? Or do you think that they will be losing and they'll be like sheep scattered on the hillside? Let me tell you what happened. Verse 29. Ahab, king of Israel, Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, attacked Ramoth Gilead. All day long, the fighting went on, from morning till night, hot and heavy. King Ahab, he said to Jehoshaphat, "Can I wear your royal robes? I'll pretend that I'm you, and I'll ride with your royal robes on my chariot, and you just dress like a normal soldier." Jehoshaphat said, "Well, if you want." So he gave his royal robes over to Ahab, thinking that Ahab would be safe. Well, one of the archers on the other side of the Amorites, very interesting, he picked up his bow and arrow and he took a shot and he shot at Ahab. And it says it hit between the two armor plates and he was killed right there on his chariot. And there were shouts reverberating up and down the battlefield. "Abandon camp! Abandon camp! Head for home! The king is dead." The battle is lost. Israel was scattered over the hills, sheep with no shepherd. Now, I told you that I was going to make an application at the end of the story for you and me. Let me tell you what I've learned from this wonderful story. Brentview Church right now, in the midst of this horrible pandemic, is Ramoth Gilead. It belongs to you, but you can't have it. I know it's yours, but you can't have it. That virus would love to get our church and attack us so that we could be scattered like sheep without a shepherd. And you know, because Ramoth Gilead, our church, doesn't belong to us anymore, we can't have any weddings here. We can't have any funerals here. We can't have any encore here. We can't have any baptisms here. There's no communion left for us to have. There's no discovery class. There's no worship service. Ramoth Gilead, Brentview, belongs to us, but we can't occupy it. Are you also aware that there are prophets out there on television and in the news and in their paper that are telling you, go take it. Go on back to church. Safest place on earth. That coronavirus is only a hoax. It's only a cold, and it's no more than a flu bug. Forget the hygiene. You don't have to wash. You don't have to have on a mask. You don't have to distance. Discovery class, I'm here to tell you that every one of you that are listening to me are Micaiahs. Did you hear that? You're a Micaiah. And you're standing alone. And you're standing alone against one of the fiercest enemies that has ever landed in Canada or has ever landed in Calgary. And the Ahabs of this world are telling you that you don't have to be afraid of the virus. Are you aware that 24% of those of you in our class that are my age and older, 24% are going to die if you catch the virus? Do you find that sobering? I do. I think it's important that you and I learn to wash our hands, cover our face, distance ourselves by 3 bales of hay. That's the only way that we're going to protect. There's nothing else that we've got on our side. There's no vaccine yet. So what do? Margaret and Cecil, an older couple, they lived in a small town. He worked at the basket factory. She was a homemaker. They had no children. She was blind. But they did everything together. When they planted the garden, Cecil would go with his binder twine and he'd lay out the lines, and she on her hands and knees would put out the Dutch sets, and then she'd put her next row of all her different vegetables all the way down to her melons. And then he would weed it, and then in the fall, she would come along and harvest. They did everything together, doing dishes. She was a wonderful knitter. She loved to knit, and she would give them away, everything that she knit. It could be booties for a baby. It could be a bonnet. It could be a lovely sweater. It could be mitts. It could be a toque. She did everything, but she was a marvelous knitter. One day, the two of them became Christians. They went to church and they found the Lord, and they were so happy together. Margaret said to Cecil, "Cecil, I want to celebrate our newfound faith in Christ by knitting you a new sweater. I've been given 8 or 10 lovely skeins of white wool, and I'm going to knit you a sweater. Would you let me knit you a sweater? You can put it underneath your suit coat when you go to church on Sunday." Cecil said, "Yes, that'd be an honor." But then Margaret said, "I would like to do something even more special. Could you find me some words that I could knit and put on the front breastplate of your white sweater that you could wear underneath your coat?" Well, he said, "I'll look and see." One day he was downtown and he saw a sign in one of the store windows, and it was in red lettering, and there were only 3 words, and they were short enough that he thought, maybe Margaret could put that on my sweater. So he wrote it down the best he could. And then he went home and he explained it to Margaret. And Margaret said, "Well, that's lovely, Cecil. Could you maybe cut those letters out? And I will line them up, and then I will pattern that so it could be fine for you on your sweater." Over time, she finished her job. And it was time to go to church. Oh, they were so proud. And when they went off to church, he wore this lovely new sweater with in red letters these 3 words on the front. Well, when they went in and people asked to see it, he was so proud to show it off. It was wonderful. When the service was over and they were leaving the church, they said to the pastor, "Pastor, could you tell me what this says?" And the pastor looked at them and said, "Yes. It says, under new management." Discovery class, that's where you are right now. You and I are under new management. We would like to have Ramoth Gilead back, but we're under new management. We would like to come in and worship, but we're under new management. I'd love to have you in Encore, but we're under new management. I'm here in our Sunday school class, and I would love to give you our class back, but we're under new management. So until it happens, we're going to have to do what we're doing now. Keep our distance, and we got to remain safe. And I will remain online with you so that you can have your class, but it's this way. That's how I have to do it with you. Now, before I let you go, can I tell you a joke? There were two preacher boys whose father they were upset with. Their dad, when he preached, didn't know when to stop. He went on and on and on, and he was very long-winded. So they got together and they said, here's what we're going to do. They snuck into their father's study on Saturday night, and they took his notes out of his Bible, and they glued 2 pages together. And then on Sunday morning, when their father was up there preaching his heart out and waxing eloquent, he said, and Noah chose a wife, and she was 30 cubits high, 50 cubits wide, and 300 cubits long. See you next week. Thanks for being with me today.